All right. Good morning, everyone. So I'm a sports fanatic, and I've been thinking of a lot about anger, a lot about resentment in relationship to sports, and also thinking about those issues and seeing how kind of what we discover in sports kind of translate to other areas of competition and performance, that being entrepreneurship, that also being in the arts, that also being in the academy. Here's a quick fact. I played basketball half of my life. I was also a college athlete. And it's interesting because all of those kind of competitive and mentality that I had in sports, I kind of have taken with me in academia in a very healthy way. So just to kind of keep this in mind, although I'm kind of using sports example when I'm going to talk about today, I think it transfers to so many different other fields, and I'm trying to be explicit as I can in relationship to that. So today I want to talk to you about what I believe is the interplay between resentment, motivation, and performance. All right? Okay. So recently I came across an interesting article. It was by two reporters from the Wall Street Journal. And they wrote a very, what I would call, a snarky article about a phenomenon in the States that we call having a chip on your shoulder. Is anyone familiar with that idiom at all, having a chip on your shoulder? All right. So you can see the article simply says, Wall Street Journal investigation. Chips on shoulders dominate the NFL draft. All right. So recently, earlier this year, there was the NFL draft. And one of the things that the journalists recognized is that the top pick in particular, when he got interviewed, he basically announced or self-identified or tried to convey that through it all, although he was the number one draft pick, he had what we call a chip on his shoulder. The reporter also recognized that out of the 32 top individuals who were drafted, 18 of them also had chips on their shoulders, hence the article that the chips on the shoulders dominate the NFL draft. So just to make sure that we don't get lost in translation here, the idiom simply means for someone to have resentment, long-lasting resentment. Another way that we use to describe this is to have a grudge. I learned from two individuals yesterday that there's a Portuguese term for that. I am not going to try to pronounce that. But there's also a German word for it. I'm also not going to try to pronounce that either. But what was interesting that I found about the German word, as someone was trying to break down each word for me, was that it was basically kind of a lasting anger that was constantly being fed and nourished. Right? And so that's simply what I mean by chip on the shoulder, resentment, grudge, however you pronounce the Portuguese word and however you pronounce the German word. All right. So now that we know what we're talking about here. So here are, in addition to the top draft pick, here are three other top drafts picks who expressed that they had a chip on their shoulder. Beyond about to make millions of dollars and being drafted top, they still had a chip on their shoulder. They still had resentment. And just to be clear, some of y'all may ask, why are they angry? Well, some of them suggest that they have a chip on their shoulder because they weren't picked as high as they thought they would be. Some of them have a chip on their shoulder because they remember not being selected by certain college teams, so that's a memory for them. Some of them also, particularly the top draft pick, he won the Heisman, but he had to walk on to this college team, right, to kind of prove himself, so he didn't get a scholarship. So all of them are remembering the times that they were overlooked prior to the NFL and also during the NFL, and so they expressed this chip on their shoulder. So here's Josh Rosen, who simply suggests that his chip was growing bigger. Lamar Jackson suggests that he had a chip on both shoulders, which I think it suggests that he had a chip on the shoulder ×2. And then Josh Allen simply suggests that his chip was not just present that night, but it was going to remain for the rest of his NFL career. All right. So the article kind of continues with the writer suggesting that NFL teams believe that a good chip speeds up players' motivation. And I want to talk about a little later about how this chip, having a chip on your shoulder, having this resentment, can feed into motivation. But they admit that. But they also admit that the exact mechanics of the chip remain unclear. We don't know quite how resentment works in sports, but people are just talking about it and they're proud that they carry it. However, they end the article suggesting that they simply reduce having this resentment, having a chip shoulder, to these individuals trying to one-up themselves about how slighted they feel. Now, as a philosopher, I spend all day analyzing things that people take for granted and that people think are snarky and funny. And I wanted to know about the exact mechanics of the chip on the shoulder, right? So what did I do? I went into psychology, right? Trying to figure out, have psychologists looked at this? Psychologists, particularly sports psychologists, have spent some time looking at the emotions, looking at sports. So I wanted to see what they thought about this. But what I found was two kind of themes that kind of reigned supreme. One thing was that they had a tendency to study the relationship between aggression and anger in sports. But once again, I want to make it very clear, and I'll talk about this later on, that anger is not the same as resentment, right? Usually anger is short-lived, it happens during that particular performance, and we're not talking really about long-lasting resentment, right? They also have studied the impact of anger on performance. There's a few studies that suggest when someone is really angry and they're about to perform, that sometimes one of the backdrops to it is that they begin to have coordination problems. So that has indeed been studied, but still not the connection between resentment, motivation, and performance. So then, as a philosopher, I wanted to know what the philosophers thought. And I looked at some philosophy of sports literature, and I found that they also tend to focus on kind of sports-specific anger, particularly anger that takes place in combative sports. They also have a tendency to kind of give respect to this notion of what we call kind of feigned anger, kind of fake anger in order to pump up. A coach uses to pump up his team, and also kind of the fake anger that we may use when we're about to go work out in the gym. Like, you're not really angry, but you like get in that mode to kind of pump. So they kind of look at the ethics of that, but still they haven't looked at kind of the correlation between resentment, motivation, and performance. So everything was empty, didn't find any solutions, and so I felt that it was my mission to try to figure out the link between resentment, not only in sports particularly, but also in other fields in which competition and achievement is very important. Like I said, in other fields such as entrepreneurship, academia, and the arts. All right. So I'm gonna call this chip shoulder thing, the chip shoulder phenomenon. I may use CSP for short. All right. So how are we going to proceed? I first want to kind of talk about, philosophers, they always want to give an account of something. So I want to kind of talk about what I take to be the nature of CSP, or having a chip on your shoulder, or having long-lasting resentment in relationship to one's field, or one's experiences in one field. And then I want to talk about usually who is this long-lasting resentment directed at? And then I'm going to talk about the duration. How long can this resentment last? I want to talk about what does having this resentment reveal about the human condition. And then I want to leave you with some takeaways, at least 6 takeaways. All right, so let's talk about the nature of this. So here's a long account, and I'm going to kind of break this down. So CSP, once again, the chip shoulder phenomenon. It involves a lasting grudge. So it's a grudge that one has and it lasts over time. But I also want to say that although it's resentment, it's kind of what I call kind of controlled resentment. If you was in a session yesterday with me and Just as we were talking about awe and anger, we kind of talked about this notion of kind of cultivating and managing one's anger. And I want to suggest that individuals who have a chip on their shoulder have learned how to control or manage or cultivate their resentment in a way for productive means. It also includes a desire for payback, a desire for revenge, but I'm going to call that revenge non-moral. And the payback is directed at being overlooked, being slighted, or being underestimated in one's particular field, right? And I want to argue later on that CSP, it also motivates the individual, and thus we can suggest that it can enhance performance, right? Some of you all may have experienced this once in your life. If you haven't, you guys are so virtuous and I admire you so much. All right. Okay. So I think it's important for us to make a distinction between anger versus resentment, just to be very, very clear. So let's go back to the kind of sports scenario. So when psychologists and philosophers look at anger, particularly anger in relationship to sports, here are some of the causes of that anger, right? So what you'll find is that as an athlete is performing, and say for instance they don't like another player, there's a probability that they may get into a fight or be angry with each other throughout the game. I don't know how many of y'all follow American sports, but there was a recent fight in the NBA between the Los Angeles Lakers and what is the other team? I think it was the Houston Rockets. And the point guard, Rondo, doesn't like, I feel like I'm gossiping, the point guard, Rondo, doesn't like the other point guard, Chris Paul, but that is the case, and they end up getting in a fight with each other. Not surprising. So it usually comes about because of enemy play. One can get angry because they consider that something unfair has happened in the game, such as the ref have called it unfair play. They can also get angry because they have a desired outcome. So getting angry because they lost the game, getting angry at themselves for making a bad decision during the game. It can also come about by someone making kind of what we call a hard fight. And if you think about this, given that these are the causes, it makes sense that usually the response, this angry response, will lead to violence or leads to aggression, right? And you can see how this happens in sports. However, in relationship to the chip on the shoulder phenomenon, what really brings this about is disapproval, being discounted and being disrespected. And I want to argue that the action tendency with these particular causes is not violence or aggression. It's usually, I want to prove them wrong. Right? That is usually the action tendency for these particular causes. All right. Okay. Another thing that I kind of want to highlight here is that the individual who has this long-lasting resentment, they're not responding to any kind of what we would call moral wrongs, right? Think about this. If you didn't get drafted, if you didn't get hired, if it wasn't for reasons of sexism or racism, the job, the company, the sports organization didn't do anything wrong by not hiring you, right? That's just the game, right? Some people get hired, some people don't. Some people get demoted, some people get promoted, right? That's just part of the game. So they're not responding to a moral wrong in particular. But what is happening and what is wrong to them is that it happened, right? And not only did it happen, but it happened to them, right? And so this is the thing that allows their long-lasting resentment to be, in philosophy, what we'll call apt or befitting, right? So it doesn't have to be anything that was done morally wrong to them. But the fact that it happened to them, the fact that they didn't get the job, the fact that they didn't get promotion, the fact that they didn't get drafted onto the team, that gives them reason to have this chip on their shoulder. All right. So there's two other unique dimensions to this phenomenon. There's what we call the protest dimension, right? So if you notice, the only reason why these journalists even know that the NFL players have a chip is that they have verbally communicated that they have a chip on their shoulder. And there's a reason why that's done, right? And there's a protest dimension, right? They need to make it very clear that 4 years ago, I had to walk on this team. That wasn't right. I worked for what I needed to get. And even in proclaiming or self-identifying that they had the chip, that was a way for them to verbally protest what happened to them in the past. But there's also a payback dimension. And I know sometimes, usually when we hear the words payback, usually when we hear the words revenge, it's usually very morally loaded, right? We think that the person is intending to cause kind of physical harm, psychic harm, or status harm, such as dehumanization. But I want to make it very clear that what I consider the chip on your shoulder phenomenon is that it does indeed have a payback dimension, but it's non-moral payback, right? So they do not intend to cause any kind of harm. I talked about how they do not intend to be kind of aggressive or to be violent. I wouldn't call causing someone regret a mental harm, although it happens in the psychic and in the brain, whatever. I don't know the dimensions of what happens with regret. Although regret may be an outcome, I wouldn't say that is mental harm. And I also would suggest, which is very interesting from a status perspective, is that usually outside of sports, let's just say in a moral context, Sometimes we want to get the person back because we want to bring them very low for how they made us feel, and that's not dehumanization. But in sports and in other fields, we don't want any kind of status harm. One of the things about sports is that there are some teams that are number one, there are some teams that's number two, there's some players who are number one, there are some players who are not even on the list. And so the only status, this is kind of a non-moral status, they want to be number one, but I wouldn't say that that's a dehumanization in any way, right? So there's a payback dimension as well. Also, you'll notice with this protest and with this payback dimension, that this kind of resentment is backward-looking, but it's also forward-looking. Usually the criticism with resentment in ethics is that people's concern is that a person who is resentful, they're only concerned about what happened in the past, right? So you hear the phrase, they are stuck in the past, right? What is interesting, I think, about having a chip on your shoulder is that, yes, it is backward-looking, which one is remembering what has happened to them, but it's also very forward-looking, right? One is thinking about, as I kind of mentioned before, how to prove to them that they are wrong. And you can only do that in future performance, right? By excelling in future performance. And one is focused on doing just that. Whether that is the training that's required to do just that, and whether that's the actual performance to do just that. So this kind of resentment is backward looking, but it's also looking forward towards the future. All right. Also, I think that it's important that not everyone is, just because you have been discounted in your life, is going to immediately have a chip on your shoulder. I think there are some people who are more disposed to having this particular disposition. And so I kind of laid out some personality traits to this profile. And you don't have to meet all of them, but I would suggest more people who are prone to have a chip on their shoulder will have some of these characteristics. So I think you at least have to be kind of sensitive, in which what people think about you or say about you kind of hit you in a certain kind of way, in which other people can just rub it off. You can't, right? But I also think that the individual is tough-minded, right? That they're not going to allow even what hurt them to kind of stop them in their tracks. And connected to that, that person will also have a very unique relationship to adversity, right? That they don't allow adversity to stop them. This person will also have an overwhelming sense of self-belief and self-confidence within themselves. And this is important because usually when people make decisions in which we take it as disrespect or that person discounting us, it's based on the belief that they probably do not think you are who you are, or that you lack potential. And so for you to protest that particular decision or that particular belief suggests that you think something quite different about yourself than other people think about you. I will also suggest that perhaps this person will also have a drive towards achievement. This person can also be patient because it takes a while to prove someone wrong. And this person will also have what I'm talking about, a hard work ethic to put in the work to eventually prove the individual wrong. So these are some personality traits of someone who will be disposed to the particular resentment. So who are some possible targets? So of course I would suggest, particularly from an organizational standpoint, whether that is in sports or in other fields, it'll be the decision makers, right? So you think about the NFL draft, I think general managers draft players. Help me out, people who love sports. Is that correct, right? So usually it's general managers who are making decisions about who's going to be chosen, of course in collaboration with presidents and owners and all that good stuff. So decision makers are responsible for this. When it comes down to you getting a promotion or you also getting your job, decision makers, important executive decision makers are making those particular decisions. So that's who the chip will be directed at. But also, what I find interesting is that the chip would also be directed to the team or the organization in which that person represents. So even think about this. I mentioned before that just a while ago that the general manager and the team president is responsible for drafting the player. However, we don't say that Michael Jordan got drafted by the general manager of such and such, right? We say that Michael Jordan got drafted by the Chicago Bulls, right? Because the individual represents the team. So I want to suggest that what we'll find a lot of times in sports, thank you, this is my mic. what we'll find a lot of times in sports is that usually when a player has been traded, they don't talk in the singular as in regards to their resentment. They also talk in the plural, and this is the reason why, right? And then another group in that I think that the long-lasting resentment can be directed to is outsiders who approve of the decision, right? So in sports, I think it's real wide, right? It could be people online who says, yes, he should have got traded. He was the weakest link. He was overrated anyway, right? And even in our private lives, there are outside people who may agree with certain decisions or may not believe in us, right? So I think that those are the range of targets. All right. So how long does having a chip on your shoulder last? So I want to say that in thinking about this question, I really thought hard about this. And I come to the conclusion that I think that a chip on your shoulder has what I call an enduring nature, right? And I don't mean that you have this chip on your shoulder until you're 99 years old and about to go into your grave. What I mean by enduring is the length of one's career. So if you are an athlete, it's the length of your athletic career when you retire, which is 40. The length of your career could be in other organizations as long as you're in that particular field. So I don't mean for life. And I'm really inspired by an American philosopher by the name of Lebron James. So I don't know how many of you all know, well, first of all, LeBron James is my favorite player ever, but about a year ago, Isiah Thomas, he's a 5'9" point guard. He previously played for the Boston Celtics. And I don't know if you all remember this, but he averaged 28.7 points that year. He took his team to the Eastern Conference Finals where they met LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. He played through a hip injury throughout the playoffs, and he also played through the death of his sister. However, when that season was over, he was traded to Cleveland. So this is LeBron James describing Isiah Thomas. He says, quote, "What I like most about him is that he has a chip on his shoulder for life." That's just who he is. When a guy's got a chip on his shoulder for life, he's never going to not work hard. All right. So let's try to make sense of why philosopher LeBron James would say that a player had the capacity to have a chip on his shoulder for life. So I think there's several reasons, right? So the first reason I think why a person would have a chip on their shoulder for life is that although things may change, their career may change, they may end up getting the MVP, they may end up being president of the organization. The fact that they were once demoted or the fact that they were once discounted, that never changes, right? And because that never changes, that gives them reasons to be what we call angry forever, right? The fact that that never changes. And I'll come back to this a little bit later. Another reason why they would have a chip on their shoulder is that the fact that someone had a belief that they weren't worth anything or that they would never make it, kind of give them overwhelming reasons to kind of prove that belief wrong, right? And so they're motivated at each step in their particular career, that each advancement that they get, each excellent performance that they make, each invention or whatever, each success that they have, to them that's another reason of why that person is wrong. And they are motivated to provide not just one reason, but overwhelming reasons to prove that person wrong. And this does indeed, it takes time, all right? Another reason why they will have this resentment forever is that usually it's not just one thing that has happened to them in their career. I mean, when you think about your own career, it's not just one time that you were discounted, it's accumulation slights. And so because there is accumulation of slights, usually one wants to give more reasons for why that person was wrong, that person was wrong, and that person was wrong. Right? And so one might think, okay, Myisha, that sounds good. But what if a person that discounted you before in your life comes to you and you say, you know what, you have done well. I mean, you've exceeded. I mean, you're extraordinary. I mean, I honestly thought that you wouldn't make it. I was wrong. I was wrong. You are amazing. And so what happens when that person that discounted you, who was the target of your resentment, if they change their mind, do you still have a reason to have long-lasting resentment? I want to say yes. And the reason is that the goal for having a chip on your shoulder is never to change the person's mind. The goal is to always target the belief to show that that belief was wrong. Right? The aim is to show and prove that that belief was wrong. And you can never take that belief back. You can never take the fact that that person discounted you back, right? You want to prove that belief was wrong, even if the person who had the belief changed their mind, right? Okay, so what does this reveal about the human condition? Okay, so one of the things that someone may say, okay, this sounds good, Myisha, but at the end of the day, you gotta think about this person a lot. You gotta carry around resentment. It may eat you up. It doesn't always feel good. I don't want to live life that particular way. Why would anyone choose this for themselves? Why would these NFL players who's about to make millions of dollars, they should be happy. Why are they concerned with chips? So my response is that the motivation that it gives, and Lebron James hinted at this, is that it provides a unique dose of motivation. So how so? So one of the things that I think about us, I think that excessive external rewards and excessive things that we get, in some ways that can inhibit our motivation to succeed. Right? When people are constantly telling you how amazing you are, how talented you are, you get so many rewards all the time, you're always winning. Sometimes that can kind of inhibit your intrinsic motivation. Another thing is that the more successful you are, there have been studies in relationship to this when studying college athletes, and what they found was that college athletes with scholarships had less motivation, and college athletes without scholarships have more motivation, more intrinsic motivation to succeed. And the reality is that sometimes our intrinsic motivation can run real low with the more success that we get, right? And so, because of that, it's interesting that not only NFL draftees, people who are coming into the league, seem to grasp onto this chip shoulder mentality, but also Tom Brady, who's a veteran football player. And also, a GOAT contender, the greatest of all time contender, Michael Jordan, is adamant with suggesting that during his career, he played with a chip on his shoulder. If you have not seen his Hall of Fame acceptance speech, if you want to look at somebody with a chip on their shoulder, that speech is mind-blowing, all right? He carried it throughout his career. And you can imagine that all his successes, and you think about Tom Brady's success, the reason why they would continue to hold on to it is because of the motivation that they were able to get, even at the top of their game. And so going back to the journalists who start off the article, they kind of alluded to the fact that this was an epidemic of chip shoulders. I want to suggest that what players and what athletes have found was a gold mine that I think we can probably get access to and use for our particular benefit. So I want to suggest that what this reveals about the human condition is that disapproval is a nice balance to the limited effects of approval, and it can provide the necessary fuel we need to strive for excellence, particularly when we're already at the top of our game. So here are some quick 6 takeaways from this talk as you go throughout your day and go back to your respective places. Number 1, revenge can be productive. All right, I know we seem to look at it as being kind of a destructive kind of thing. I hope that this talk has kind of changed your mind, that there can be kind of this non-moral payback that can be productive. I hope also that we seem to look at people who are resentful and look at that as like a pejorative kind of position. And I'm hoping that you can kind of, next time you see somebody who's resentful at your job, who may have a chip on their shoulder, don't look at them as wallowing in the past. Perhaps they are future forward thinkers. Another takeaway, given those particular things, perhaps we can lighten up on those who have a chip, and not to think that they are going to do something destructive with it, but something productive with it. Another thing I think that we should take away, I think a concern for lots of people is that we think that we're just concerned about other people with having a chip on their shoulder. But I think what we can be reminded about is that as we are performing, we too are an audience member to our own revenge. Right? That just as other people are witnessing us succeeding, that we're also a witness of that success. Number 5, when your intrinsic motivation gets low, perhaps you can remember that someone out there thinks that you actually suck. And kind of remember that and use that as motivation. And last but not least, if your motivation is already high, I want to suggest that you overdose with something that we use in the States, using your haters as motivators. Perhaps you can overdose on that. But resentment is a good thing if you use it right. And we've all been discounted. And as opposed to wallowing in our emotions and in our fears, I think we can take hold of that resentment, use it as motivation, and take that into the next level of our performance. Thank you.
Myisha, because we're a little bit over time, may I suggest that if there are questions, because we need to, actually we would have a few announcements, but then we need to change the room setup anyway and ask you kindly to leave, and then those who signed up for the masterclass come back. My suggestion would be, for those of you who are interested in learning more and asking Myisha questions, that you just grab one of the rooms. And I would suggest it is
just go up the halls. There are several rooms for sitting down, having conversations.
In fact, the room I would suggest is the Office of Exponential Humanity, which is on the...
Well, just see what's open. It's on the second floor.
Yeah, would that be okay? I think I'll allow for a better... Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you, Myisha.